Well, welcome back, everyone. This is our noon hour session today for laws and regs. This is a CEU session. So again, please be logged in for the entire duration of the session. Now, we've timestamped you when you've logged in, and we're going to timestamp you when you log out. So if you leave early, we'll know. Please pay attention for the entire session as well. Today, I am proud to announce that joining us live from his office is Dr. Don Renchie, PhD of Texas A&M University. We're proud to call him friend, and we're proud of everything that he's done. We've appreciated his support over the years and look forward to that support moving forward into the future. Dr. Renchie, we're going to go ahead and bring you up live right now. Hopefully everything goes smooth. Be just a moment here.
Good afternoon, everyone.
On the screen now, we're going to hand it over to you. Again, thanks for doing this today, and we sure appreciate everything you do for us.
I just wanted everyone to see that in spite of COVID, we're still over here. And I'm going to take this video off so that we can get to the people's business. I want to make certain that we are actually sharing the right screen and that you all can see everything that we're doing. Hope and all the guys over there on that team, Mark and Jason and Tyler and everyone else associated with that, and especially James and the board of directors over at Producers deserve a lot of credit for like the little engine that can. Last night we were there at church and talking about the little engine that can when he was huffing and puffing getting up the hill. But boy, I tell you, once he got on top of that thing, he really figured out he can get it done. And that's kind of the way that they have done this over there this year. Hope and Mark and Jason and I have been talking about this for a while, going back to before the beef cattle short course, the fact that we needed to have gotten something done for the customers and that COVID was not going to derail the process for getting information and education out to you guys. So these are pocketbook issues. And we're going to talk about some of the things that are new, but are really old. And so as I am hitting this button here, trying to get this thing to move, I want to be certain that it's actually where we are moving the slides. So right now, Shelby and I are over here, and she's hitting next and what have you, trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So she's bringing it back in, and we're sharing the screen one more time with you guys. So now we're hitting it, and I think it's finally working. That's why they didn't leave. I've got objectives as usual. We're going to talk a little about the Auxin herbicide regulations. As you all are aware, and I'll make you more aware, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, as we have talked in the past, got more involved back here in June and July. And it really had a serious impact on the guys that were doing cotton. But it has an even more potential for having an impact across the board on those of us that may be using this for brush control in our pastures and or in our range scenarios. I'm going to talk about record keeping. I just had some experiences here in the past 2 weeks with TDA in which records were really important from the standpoint of having had a situation with a complaint. And I'm going to talk about worker protection as it may relate to those of us who are producing hay. And then we'll round this thing out with certification and training regulations, which is what we're doing now on the research side. As usual, we'll talk about strategies that we as producers need to consider or implement to make sure we're abiding by these rules. This slide kind of takes it and goes across the gamut in that Enlist in Genia, as well as Loyant down in the rice market, have had some impacts, and we've had training requirements in Texas since 18, but actually we've had training requirements in Texas since the 50s related to the use of 2,4-D and Dicamba and in particular since the 70s as related to licensing. So I want to put all this stuff in perspective and make certain that we are abiding by these rules, because everything that we do, that we can demonstrate to EPA, that they can demonstrate to the courts, that the courts can demonstrate to the people that bought the lawsuits, and we'll talk about all that, then we still have access to these very important production tools. For the past year or so, I have gotten from Dr. Nolte, and we've used this synthetic Auxin sensitivity scale, and mine in red says for Dicamba. And this doesn't matter if I'm a pasture guy or a cotton guy. This slide simply says that if my neighbor has broccoli or cabbage or pecans in their property or on their premises, if I'm using a pint of Dicamba, that these cottons at 1/75th that rate demonstrate sensitivity. That reminds me that as the land becomes fragmented across the country, we need to be aware of what's going on the other side of the fence. When it talks about moderate, that says that between 1/75th of that 16-ounce pint rate and less than 1/300th of that rate, that cucumbers, peaches, peanuts, and squash also demonstrated sensitivity to Dicamba. On the severe side of sensitivity, between 1/300th but less than 1/800th of that rate, 1 pint per acre, I can depend on peppers, tomatoes, and watermelons to have demonstrated severe sensitivity, along with cotton that wasn't engineered to recognize that molecule. When I come over here on the extreme side, then we throw in soybeans that may not have been engineered to recognize that technology, along with anybody in my neighborhood that may have had beans, peas, potatoes, or in Texas, had we had tobacco that wasn't in a package, then these crops would have demonstrated extreme sensitivity, and especially grapes. So I'm using a pint per acre in my pasture. And across the fence over there, I've got this neighbor that somebody sold 20 acres out of a 100-acre tract, because there's five tracts over there now. And this guy and his wife decided they wanted some grapes in there, and they weren't muscadines. They were going to actually go out and they were going to open up one of those wine tasting little venues. And I used this stuff across the fence. Well, he had some grapes, and at $5,000 or $6,000, pretty much a stick or a vine to put them in, I find myself in a very precarious situation because we're in a lawsuit. This next slide says, now, not only was it Dicamba, but the other Auxin herbicide, in this case, 2,4-D. These are some of the most widely used products across the state, and since the 50s have been regulated, and since the 70s have required licenses. When you look over here and we talk about lower sensitivity, it's pretty much the same scale. All I substituted was 2,4-D for Dicamba. And it tells me again, as we go across that gamut, on the extreme side now, as versus soybeans with 2,4-D, is cotton, and still grapes and potatoes and tobacco. I'm using 16 ounces, which is a pint, but at 1/800th of that pint, those crops demonstrated sensitivity. We want to make sure that in order to keep these products from going back to court at the federal level, as versus us in court with our neighbors at the state level in civil court, that we use these products according to the labels. When we look at this picture over here that talks about sensitivity, and I'm going to make this comparison between Dicamba, glufosinate, and glyphosate, that on the Dicamba side, you can see at 1/100th of the rate that we were using, at 1/1000th of the rate that we were using, it's still pretty sensitive when we talk about those herbicides. When I talk about cotton sensitivity, again, we're looking at both 2,4-D and we're looking at Dicamba, and you can see cotton is much more sensitive to the 2,4-D than was the cotton to the dicamba. And these were non-engineered crops on the one hand. But when you got out there at that extreme rate, then you notice that even with both of them, you had some cotton. So other crops that I had listed over there would have included the 2,4-D of the dicamba on the cucumbers. And if you notice the way that those leaves cupped, they're very serious on the symptomology, and that it's definable, very distinctive. They cup up with the dicamba and cup down with the 2,4-D, and it's all pretty much at the new growth area, what we call meristematic regions. And if you look down there on those dry beans, it's indicative of the type of damage. You look over here on the tobacco or tomatoes, again, you'll find out there at the meristematic regions where you're going to see that kind of stuff. So when I talk about updating you, back in June, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed a case that was brought to their attention by non-farm or ranch clientele. They determined that EPA made two conclusions that they didn't necessarily agree with as they were making the decision to register these products back in around 2016. First, that the data that had been submitted by the applicants considered to be satisfactory wasn't necessarily so. And second, that the approval would not significantly have increased the risk of unreasonable adverse effects on the environment. And they found that EPA erred at that third bullet in making these conclusions, when actually they substantially understated several risks of dicamba, such as misjudging by as much as 25% the amount of acreage on which the dicamba would have been used in 2018, concluding that the complaints to state departments of agriculture could have either been underreported or overreported the actual amount of dicamba damage, when the record clearly showed that the complaints understated the amount of damage. So you got two problems with, in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals opinion, EPA made. And thirdly, that they failed to quantify the amount of damage that was caused by the dicamba in the cotton and in the soybean scenarios in the 34 states in which these products were registered. The reason we're talking about this afternoon is because these products are still under scrutiny. Mark and his crew down there and the Ag Chem, along with Jason and the guys that have these stores over in the other two locations around Texas, over here in Southeast Texas, for those cotton producers and or soybean producers that had these technologies, right now, those registrations have been vacated. As a matter of fact, the court pointed out several things, saying that EPA entirely failed to acknowledge other risks, including the risk of substantial non-compliance with label restrictions, the risk of economic costs, and the risk of social costs, in that there was actually a shooting in Arkansas, because one neighbor had the technology and the other one didn't. So as the court considered all these things, they said that given EPA's understatement of those risks, they concluded that there was substantial evidence not to continue allowing that registration of 3 different products. And this decision did not even address the Endangered Species Act issues, which were some of the primary issues that the plaintiffs brought forth when they brought forth this complaint. And I want to remind you, we talked about this every time I've been with us over the years that we've had these expos. It wasn't the farmer or the rancher that took this to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It was those folks in the communities whose opinions were stronger than those of us who were affected. And so the court listened at those folks as versus those of us who were actually in the game. Now, Bayer did some things here in an effort to calm some of the concerns from the courts, but it didn't necessarily work. They are trying to settle those drift cases. They've set aside about $400 million. We may recall that previously Monsanto had the Roundup technologies, and those cases right now about $9 billion, trying to resolve some 125,000 complaints, because as we've listened at this thing, and all you got to do is turn the TV on, especially at nighttime, and there are folks out there still saying, well, if you have an issue with Roundup, bring it forward. Then you look, and we weren't necessarily aware about this $820 million for PCB and water litigation. So everything that we can do when we're using any products from Roundup to 2,4-D to Dicamba, if we keep them out of the environment in a manner where they could have been shown to be pollutants and or something that was going to have damaged the environment or the public's health, the longer we can keep those products around. So I, as the coordinator of the largest program in the United States, I'm obligated to remind us that this is not a game. This is not a Bubba thing. That every time we're doing this, we want to be like Lawrence. We want to follow the labels explicitly. We want to make certain we're using these products in a manner consistent with the labels to keep ourselves out of litigation and to keep these valuable production tools at our disposal. As I summarize this discussion about those synthetic auxin herbicides, I'll say the following couple things. We all know that dicotyledonous plants are very sensitive to those herbicides. We all know that extremely low doses, as a matter of fact, 1% below the full rate, can cause visible symptoms. The labels are out there for a reason. If we follow them, in general, we can prevent both drift to sensitive crops as well as spray contamination on non-target organisms, as well as making certain we keep those spray tanks clean. Following good techniques and strategies, we can mitigate off-target movement. Now, I've added these other two bullets down here, reminding us that the registrants have submitted new registrations to EPA. Dr. Nolte is going to come on after me here this afternoon. He and I were on the phone earlier this week and last week, talking about where these registrations may go for those of you all who may both not only ranch but farm, and you may, as farmers, be raising cotton. The prayer is that EPA may register these 3 products again for 2021. But the concern would be that the Ninth Circuit may come back in because the plaintiffs may bring it back up, and we don't know if they're going to vacate it again. So those of us that have responsibility for stewardship using these products, let's do the best we can. So I'm telling you in this last bullet that they're reviewing the applications, and they may make a registration determination in the near future as we move forward. Now, changing gears a little bit and dealing with some stuff that we've been doing since the 70s are records. I had the experience during the past 3 weeks, and especially during the last 2, to have been visited by TDA inspectors working some complaints. And these records are very interesting because there is at least 2 different kinds of records that TDA can ask you for, depending on your payroll, the amount of pesticide that you have, or the types of employees that may be on your establishment. So that brings us up with 3 different types of records. There's this USDA record that was put into play back in the 1990 Farm Bill. When you look at this slide, it reminded us that under USDA's record keeping requirements, they wanted to know the name, your license number, the month, the year and the date, the reg number of the product, the active ingredient you were putting out, the brand name, the commodity or the site, the restricted entry interval. They wanted to know something about the acres that were sprayed, if it was spot treated and this kind of a thing like that, total amount applied. And then they wanted to know the field ID location along with any other records. Now, that was all fine for USDA. As I said, it was put out in the 1990 Farm Bill. It dealt with restricted use pesticide applications on spot treatments, and it talked about they had to have been recorded by us as applicators within 14 days and had to have been maintained for 2 years, similar to what TDA requires. We knew that they included applications of herbicides, which were going to be for control of weeds. Fungicides were for diseases, insecticides were for insect pests, and rodenticides were going to have been for vertebrate pests and any other product that claims to have controlled or repelled a pest organism. We know that those records were required for each application and that the certified applicator, either certified private or licensed private, as well as non-commercial or commercial in the state of Texas, again, had to maintain that for 2 years and had to record it within 14 days. That anyone could have requested it from a state pesticide control official, such as TDA, to USDA and or EPA. That the federal laws would have required that because they were for restricted use pesticides. EPA required that, and so did TDA. That the applicator, by having kept those records in USDA's vernacular, was demonstrating professionalism, that it was a good business tool, that without those records, it was difficult to have portrayed us as having been competent, and that it was crucial to have provided that information to officers doing compliance-related stuff when they were investigating us. That either USDA or EPA requirements could have been satisfied by private applicators or any other applicator. And it was prudent for us to have always maintained those records and that information for that requirement. When you look at this slide, it talked about those states in blue, including Texas, that had our own separate requirements in addition to what USDA may have had, or in addition to what EPA may have said. So I want you to take a good look here, and it demonstrates that if you keep what Texas required, then you already had what USDA required, and you far exceeded what EPA required. So on the next slide, it says now, as a private applicator, and that's primarily what we have on the phone today, again, they're repeating themselves, that not only was it required for restricted use pesticide applications, but there could have been additional items. And in Texas, especially if you used or stored 55 gallons or 500 pounds with a $15,000 seasonal payroll, then that's Texas' right to know. And so all this additional information had to have been kept, especially wind direction, temperature, and speed, that it had to have been recorded within that period of time and had been maintained. So in order to have done this, I put up this record keeping form for you all. Those of you all that have been doing this for a while know that you can go on our website and you can download this information. You also know that this same record keeping form can be accessed on TDA's website under their forms link. The thing that I wanted to be certain that I pointed out in red, the data that the guy from TDA was looking for in order to help him establish whether or not the respondent, being the person who had been complained against, had drifted, was this climatological data, because it was a terrestrial application. In addition to that, though, it was an aerial application, and so he wanted that FAA information. He actually asked the person that filed a complaint if they could see the number on the plane. And the guy was going, well, had I stood in the field, I may have been sprayed too. And so we just kind of want to remind you that the inspectors, they're going to ask this stuff like Columbo. As a matter of fact, I called and I told him, I said, the way you did this reminded me of Columbo, because it was just one more thing. And each one more thing was something that, had they not had recorded in those records, those guys would have literally found themselves also having a complaint. The complainant would have been in trouble too. So I want you to remember that while they may come out and they may be investigating a complaint that you initiated, if you have an applicator's license, they're going to check your records as well. When you notice down here, it talks about the spot treatments. I wanted you to see that on our record keeping form in Texas, we already had anticipated and have the capacity for you to keep up with that spot treatment information. So there's nothing new under the sun, that if you download the record keeping form from our website, and or you go onto TDA's website, you'll find it. As a matter of fact, if you look real closely, you'll see where it talks about direct supervision affidavit. There's a checkbox for that. The inspector asked about it because we had employees out here where that individual had made that aerial application, and they wanted to know if they were present in the field. They wanted to know about the WPS training. Had they been trained? So they had to find the records. The complainant had to find the records for his employees that were going in the field that had been sprayed by someone else. And so again, had he not had those records straight, even though they had complained about the drift, they would have still been in violation. And then they wanted to also know when it was signed and dated as it related to the label for training under either WPS or under TDA's rules for direct supervision. So this record is all inclusive. And if you want to make certain that you have the right information, go to the website and download it. Now, I just threw this WPS training card over here just to ensure, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, that if you are producing hay, and I've got several of you all that actually are almost commercial hay producers, from the Britons to some other folks up on OSR out there, and they know who they are, to some folks up on Old Reliance Road, and to some folks out here off of 159. All of us, you all that are producing hay, very well could find yourselves being under the WPS record keeping requirements, because if you're selling that commodity or if a product's been used on that place in the last 30 days, even if the restricted entry list has expired, then you needed to have had trained those folks. So I kind of condensed all this thing on this one slide here, saying that the regulatory reasons for maintaining records, not only for USDA, but in general for Texas's rules under Right to Know, WPS, as well as EPA, would have been for inspections, access, doing a routine inspection. So there's two different types of inspections that you see up there. There's a records inspection by regulators or health professionals when an emergency may have occurred. There you would have had WPS and Right to Know kick in. WPS would have said for a health professional that they needed to have known the last time it was used, what it was used for, whereas Right to Know would have said not only the last time it was used, but did you have crop sheets that would have had more specific information about the applications. A routine inspection, a TDA inspector can pull up outside your place, sit there in their truck with their binoculars or with their naked eyes and watch you make an application, either as a commercial applicator or as a private applicator. That's called a use observation. Or they can come over and they can actually form a routine inspection that we call a facility inspection, where they're not sitting in their pickup, but they actually call you in advance, knock on your door, and come over. They want to sit down in your office and go through your records. Or for medical purposes, where a person has filed a complaint against you and they had their representative come out and they want to get this information, or for compliance issues, such as the complaint that we were just working with them out here last week for the past 2 weeks. The benefits of keeping those records, not only do they help you keep up with your management decisions as far as the effectiveness, or your management decisions as far as resistance issues or application efficacy or liability protection, but also for inventory as well as pesticide use data. Now, let's switch gears and make sure that for the next half hour or so here, about the next 20 minutes, we go through at least 2 more laws. So we've gone and we've talked about the Dicamba thing with the 2,4-D. And the reason we talked about that was we want to maintain those tools. I wanted to remind you that it wasn't a farmer or a rancher that filed a lawsuit. It was someone else that didn't even have a farm that filed a lawsuit. We talk about the WPS. It's been around since 1992. And at the federal level, it came out for the same reason that the law came out in Texas in 1989 to protect workers that I just iterated to, that we call the Right to Know law, or the Texas Hazard Communication Standard. All these were a result of lawsuits by advocacy groups on behalf of folks that worked on farms and ranches, where they contended that we weren't doing a good job of protecting those folks. So this one is the federal law. And it again says it was updated in 2015, initially published in 92, revised in 96, and then revised again in 15, with those becoming fully effective in 18. So since 2018, including us hay producers, and I keep repeating this, I can't say it enough, it requires that I inform workers who work on my agricultural establishment, or a handler who is a worker that also has been trained to apply the pesticides, about the exposures to pesticides And now, as versus having before 15 to only do it every 5 years, I'm required to do it annually. But aside from WPS, if I had someone working on my agricultural establishment in Texas and they were using a state limited use pesticide, or they were using a regulated herbicide or a restricted use pesticide, even if it wasn't WPS, if they were going to use it under my supervision, I had to train them annually anyhow. So the WPS is not anything new. I'm just reminding us that they're overlapping laws. In addition to that, WPS requires that I display and provide application information, including safety data sheets. Going back to right to know, or if it wasn't right to know, but under supervision, I still had to train on the label as well as the safety data sheet. Now, this stuff can be requested by the worker or the handler or medical personnel or what they're calling a designated representative. Well, since 1989 in Texas, they've had designated representatives or medical personnel that could have requested this anyway if I had the 55 gallons of the 500 pounds and $15,000 seasonal or the $55,000 or the $50,000 annually. If the label said I had to post either for WPS or just posting in general, I had to post for an outdoor application, but under WPS, since 15 and effective 18, the posting for outdoors now says if it has a restricted entry interval of longer than 48 hours. This next slide talks about, again, the annual training. There's no grace period. And so we want to make certain that we got all that straight. And I'm just showing you this rodeo label. So I've got some aquatic vegetation out here on my place in my pond. And I'm going to go over there and I'm going to tell Mark or Jason or Hope, or I'm going to run down and I'm going to grab Andy Scaston and I'm going to worry the heck out of him and say, well, look, I want to know what I can use out there. I'd better remember that even if I'm using this and I might be producing an agricultural commodity, I don't know, let's say catfish. If that thing has that agricultural use requirements on there and I'm going to sell that catfish, I may have found myself having done something that could have been in violation. But more than likely, I would have been in a non-ag use box. So anytime that you see, and I'm not raising catfish or I'm not fishing them by the pound, but they're just out there for my grandkids to come and get, that's non-ag uses. But you could very well have found yourself over on an ag use with rodeo, because it has other than those uses as well. So always read the entire label, the whole doggone label, before you make the purchase and or before you make the application, especially. Because if you make that application and it has that little red box that I have up there delineated, and it says agricultural use requirements, and then you got folks using this stuff on your behalf, and you didn't train them and all this kind of a thing like that, you could have very well found yourself in violation. I would remind you that a worker is anyone who's compensated that are doing tasks such as harvesting, weeding, watering, suckering, or relating to the production of an agricultural plant on a farm, a forest, a nursery, or a greenhouse. And that's why we have things that we could have called anything could be a farm nowadays, including the catfish farm, but they're talking about where you would have been producing plants. And that's why I keep telling us that our hayfield is a farm, because it's a plant for sale. The next slide talks about a handler. And again, whether it's right to know with the 55 gallons, 500 pounds, 15,000, 50,000 annual, or it's pure WPS with that little red box up there. They're a handler if they mix, load, transfer, apply. But if they handle open containers, or if they're flagging, or if they're cleaning, adjusting, or handling, or repairing any part of pesticide application equipment that could contain residues. So they didn't have to be mixing, loading, or applying. They simply could have been over there handling the equipment or assisting in the application, including soil incorporation of pesticides. In Texas, always be aware that if they're not your immediate family, then these WPS things, they fully kick in. Now, the annual training has its own card. Previously, Mark's been around long enough to remember when the cards were green and blue. Well, now the cards have no color. They're just cards. They're two-sided. The left side shows the date of the training, the employee signature, and the trainer signature. And you have to have EPA approved training material. So where it says EPA approval number, if you were on my website and you were downloading or going to use one of the videos, it has an approval number. And the only way you can be a trainer in Texas is you also have to be a certified licensed applicator, such as commercial or non-commercial or licensed private. You can't be a certified private applicator and do any training. The second part of that worker's card says now the trainer name. Now you already done signed it, but they want your name and they want the employee name, although the employees already signed it over on the other side. Then on this left, the right side over there, it says the employer. They want to know whether it was a worker or a handler that you trained them as. And again, the EPA approval number has to be recorded twice. Then it says, now, how'd you get qualified as a trainer? Was it state designated by the Department of Agriculture, or did you go to a train-the-trainer program because you weren't licensed? Or did you go to a trained trainer program for handlers, or were you a certified, meaning licensed in Texas, not certified private, but a licensed private or commercial private, commercial applicator, including non-commercial applicators? And when it says certificate number, that means your license number, the issuing state and the expiration date. I want you to be certain that you're looking at this stuff. And in Texas, we have the additional burden that if I'm going to have you working under my supervision and you're using restricted use pesticides or state limit use pesticides, or if it was me, including Roundup, I'd have you sign this direct supervision affidavit, and I would train you annually as it requires. It has the product name, the EPA reg number, the activity I have you doing, as well as the use, meaning the site that I had you making the application on. Note down here, it has the printed name of the unlicensed applicator. It has the signature of that unlicensed person. And it also has the printed name of the licensed applicator, the signature of the licensed applicator, as well as whether I was commercial, non-commercial, or private, and my license number in either case. While that may seem or appear to be redundant, it's not when that TDA inspector is sitting in your office with you asking you for these records. Let me repeat that. It may appear to be redundant, but it's not when that TDA inspector is sitting in your office with you asking you for this information. Now, if you're covered by WPS, it also says that you're supposed to have certain information at a central location at your business. We can work with you on that. Mark's familiar enough with it. Jason's becoming familiar enough with it. Even Hope knows about it now. And so if you have any questions on that kind of a thing, give me a call, because this next slide says at that location, and this is the deal, whether it's WPS or if it's right to know, you're still supposed to have that information, the nearest medical facility, including the phone number. It says now, and because OSHA requires that I have folks using these pesticides, now it kicks in safety data sheets. And in addition to that, depending on your size, Mark and Jason and the guys, because they've got more than one location around the state of Texas now, they're very familiar with those doggone HAZCOMs over there with those placards that you see. And each one of those placards, they all have a fire protection, National Fire Protection Association designation for what those colors mean. So we've talked about the hazards, emergency medical treatment, and this designated representative thing falls on you either way it goes in the state of Texas. Either by payroll and quantity or by WPS. Then it says now protecting workers. This includes, if required, the use of respirators, then respirator training. And in order to use the respirators, the training before it can be done requires a medical evaluation. After the medical evaluation forms have been submitted, fit testing. Then it also includes application exclusion zones, and anyone that's not your immediate family, either as a handler or as a worker who make early entry into a field that's been treated or a location, has to be 18. Now, all over the United States, since back in February, March, everybody's been using these N95s that you see up there on the top left. According to the medical practitioners, as it relates to COVID, that's the top of the line. As it relates to pesticide applications, that's the bottom of the line. Because above N95, 99, and 100, you also have P and R. And so it's N, R, and P. P100 is the Cadillac, or actually the Mercedes-Benz of air purifying respiratory devices. So we want to make certain that you understand you're using that N95 right now for COVID. It requires no training. But if you needed to use that N95 at the top left or the bottom left, or if you were going to use an air supplying respiratory device over on the right side, you have to have a medical evaluation. Unlike with COVID, you just put it on. But with pesticides, you have to have a medical evaluation. There's a 9-page form you have to fill out. Then you go over here to this top left, there's a fit test record. In the middle, there's an inspection checklist. And over on the right, there's a respiratory checklist for your program. So remember, pesticides are much more serious as it relates to respiratory protection requirements, although both can kill you if you don't respect them as it relates to COVID moving forward and the use of respirators with pesticides. I would also say here on this application exclusion zone thing, if I'm driving my tractor out there in my pasture and I'm spraying and I have a hay patch that I'm going to harvest 25 feet around wherever that sprayer is in that field, I can't allow anyone. If I'm having it done by airplane or helicopter 100 feet around wherever that piece of equipment is in that field, no one can be in that application zone unless it's the applicator that has the license that's making those applications. I would also, again, go back to the fact that in my hay field, I don't want anyone that's not my immediate family coming out there while a restricted entry interval is in effect, because they have to be 18 years old. And if it's been 30 days since I made that application, again, they have to be 18 years old. They're going to come out and help me harvest that hay. So we want to make certain that we respect this thing about the early entry workers. We have to mitigate. You'll notice on this bottom right side over here, I have that body wash. Well, now, Jason and Mark, they can pull that off over at Co-op. You may not be able to do it at your agricultural establishment because it says within a quarter mile of any place I have you working on that establishment, I need to have a gallon of water for a worker and 3 gallons of water for a handler. I'm saying 5 gallons, which is what the law used to be. And if you look at that portable decontamination kit, it actually has an eye wash there down in the foreground. Okay, those 2 little bottles are actually an eye wash. You look there on the backside, there's going to be some single-use towels. And if you'll notice over there, I've got about 3 gallons of water. If you run over there to Producers, or if you run over to Walmart, you may be able to find where they've got some containers, but especially at Walmart, you're going to be able over in the camping section, find that 5-gallon container, and you can fill that thing up with water, and that will suffice. So when you look at my slide, it says a change of clothing, portable eye wash station, liquid soap, and single-use towels. Now, on this slide, we remind you of common sense things. It says you want to wash your hands before you touch your eyes or your mouth. That's good not only for pesticides, but for COVID. You want to wash your hands before you eat. You want to wash your hands before you drink, smoke, chew gum, or use tobacco, and obviously before you go to the toilet. And that's good for pesticides as well as for COVID, as well as for protecting your family. The changes with the greatest impact had to do with this age thing. So I would tell you that, can the guy who sprays for hire allow his neighbor's kids to help him spray? No. Can the guy that custom harvests your hay allow his neighbor's kids to help? No. They have to be immediate family, or they have to be 18 years old. When we talk about immediate family is going to be those folks that have the following exemptions. They're exempt from the minimum age, either as workers or handlers. They're exempt from pesticide safety training. They're exempt from cleaning, storing, or maintaining PPE. They're exempt from notice of applications as well as central posting of hazardous information. They're exempt from decontamination supplies, and they're exempt from emergency assistance. But let me ask you, when you look at that little fellow down there on the right, looking at the big fellow over there on the left, are you not going to ensure that you train that little fellow over there on everything that slide says over there on the left? Because that little fellow may be the only person that comes by the nursing home to make sure that you have a clean dependence. Or that little fellow may be the only person that comes by the nursing home to bring your birthday card. So I'm going to train that little fella. And everything that it says I don't have to train them in, because that's my next generation. That's my future. It talks about the things that I have to train them on, such as wearing the labeled PPE, keeping out of the treated areas, assuring that the products that are applied don't come in contact, and ensuring that we abide by the application exclusion zones, and that we get the medical evaluations. When you look at the slide over here on the left, that photograph, again, that's that little fella that's gotten a little bigger. And the person standing over there with him could be either your granddaughter or maybe someone that he or she truly cares for. Either way it goes, that's the future of agriculture, not only in Texas, but across this great country we call the United States. So we're not going to just use an exemption because we have one. We're going to abide by the rules because it's common sense. And it's the only way in which we're going to make a future in agriculture. As immediate family goes, it does include your son-in-law. I've grown to kind of halfway like one or two of mine. It takes a while. It's kind of like taking castor oil. You have to hold your nose while you're doing it, but you'll be all right. Because at the end of the day, immediate family does include your spouse, your parents, your step-parents, your foster parents, fathers-in-law, mothers-in-law, children, stepchildren, including your wife's son, daughters-in-law, grandparents, grandchildren, brothers, sisters, brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and first cousins. I'm going to throw in second and third cousins around here in Texas because we want to know who all our cousins are, so we avoid things that folks over in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama do, such as cheating in football. Workers and handlers on governmental establishments do not meet these exemption allowances, and it says daughters' boyfriends are not covered either. Going to the end of this presentation, I'm going to spend a few minutes on applicator relicensure as well as getting licenses. This slide says that while they came in and they updated the standards for getting a license in Texas, there's nothing new that they updated because we've already been doing those things. We've already had closed book exams in Texas for demonstrating competency. We've already had closed book exams in Texas to strengthen the gauges, such as a 70 to get the license. We've never had a non-reader where if you wanted a private applicators or a commercial applicators license, someone would read for you. We've always had label requirements that you had to adhere to protect pollinators. We also know in Texas that you don't drive an open cab tractor where you may have hornets in the ground or feral bees, especially if you're over 55 years old, because you can't quit it like you used to. We've always had don't breathe soil fumigants in Texas. We've always had limited use categories such as M44s and livestock protection collars. And since 2014, we've had credentials in that our licenses always have had barcodes on them. So when you go over to producers or you go over to an extension function, these guys have barcode scanners. And when we get back together, you'll see, we'll scan you when you come in. What they've done this year is we made you pre-register. So we're still credentialing you in the state of Texas. Well, when I show this slide, we always get a kick out of it because we're talking about limited use. And we know that the two coyote species in Texas that we're trying to control are the ones over there on the left, and that we use the collar up there on the top right, protect sheep and goats and daughters. And we use the M44 down here on the bottom to protect sheep, goats, and calves and daughters from the coyote down there on the bottom left. And so there's nothing new in the state of Texas. We're going to continue doing what we're doing, and we've satisfied this. Now, again, going back to the things that we've done in Texas, we've always required demonstrating competency, and we've had annual training, not just for WPS, but for under supervision. You always had to have been certified in the state of Texas to have trained folks. You always had to have either had either TDA or EPA certification credentials to train folks. And in Texas, we've had this 2-year record keeping requirement from the date of training always. In Texas, we've adopted this 18 thing for restricted use pesticides, but in Texas, we still have 16 to purchase and use 2,4-D and dicamba, unless it's the dicamba for cotton or dicamba for soybeans, which are going to be restricted use pesticides. In Texas, we have adopted this 18 thing for non-certified applicators that may be under WPS in those scenarios, but in Texas, you can get a private applicator's license at 16. And this last bullet down here says now, the national certification standards are for 3 years for renewal. Well, if you're commercial and non-commercial in Texas, it's 1 year. And if you're a private applicator in Texas, it's still 5. On the annual recertification, it's 5 years. The state plan's been modified. And down here it talks about reciprocity. We will allow you to come to Texas from Oklahoma and get a license, but only if you take an exam demonstrating you can read. The commercial applicators have to keep the records for 2 years. The dealers have to keep them for 2 years, as well as their credentials with the barcodes and the state plans. These last couple slides talk about where TDA is right now because of COVID. Jason, Mark, and Hope, working under the instruction and request of James and the board, we're not worried about the fact that TDA said that if you don't have everything on the ag side by December the 31st, renew your license, because they're providing the CEUs. And whatever county you're listening at in, those county agents, including myself, working with Mark Matoka and Scott Nolte and all of us across the state, we've been making sure that CEUs were not an issue for you to have gotten to. So while TDA may be given an allowance, it's not an issue. Now on the structural side, they say that it is an issue. If you didn't have your CEUs by December the 31st, 2020, and you needed to renew your license, it's not going to happen on their side. So they're not going to say go over to 2021 and just renew your license. That dog won't hunt. The things that I talked to you all about were 4 pieces of regulations that have been implemented. We've talked about EPA and TDA, as well as some of those citizen-related topics in which the dicamba thing came about. Those were definitely pocketbook issues, because individuals that don't wear our boots have affected the decisions that we make. We need to stay involved. We can't go around and talk about, well, you know, that don't bother me, government. No, it does bother you. And if we're not paying attention to what goes on, communicating with each other and seeking assistance when we don't understand, we were in agriculture. If we pay attention, we will remain in agriculture. These guys have done a great job. I get the pleasure of working on your behalf and for you as taxpayers on a daily basis. Every morning when I get up by 4 o'clock and I find myself thanking God for the fact that I got up about 4 o'clock, I ask myself, what can I do today to more positively affect the lives of Texans, first off, and of those across this great country we call the United States of America, on the other hand? I'd like to thank you for allowing me and my teammates to work for you. So I'm going to kick it back over to you all, Tyler. If anyone has any questions on the chat line, I've got a couple minutes here. Why don't we answer those? If not, I'll shut up and get out of the way so Dr. Nolte can come on and we can do something else.
Thank you, Dr. Renchie. It doesn't look like we have any questions. So we're going to go ahead and bring this session to a conclusion. Oh, we do have one gentleman who's joined us, and he does have a question. Yes, sir. If you are a certified private applicator, are you legal to train your workers?
No, and we talked about that. Under WPS, as well as under Right to Know, those laws preclude certified private applicators from training. As a matter of fact, you guys may recall, that's why we always say, and if you have folks that work on your establishment as a certified private applicator, please consider going and taking the training through your county agent And if your county agent's office doesn't allow that anymore, since 2014, you can now go through our website and you can log on and take the private applicator training online. And then you can go and get your license to be a licensed private applicator. That's a good question.
Any other questions? Okay, that looks, one more. Following up on that last statement,
If you are a certified private applicator,
if you are a certified private applicator,
can you hire another certified private applicator to apply the chemicals on your place?
can you hire another certified private applicator, hire that individual to apply the chemicals on your place?
Not when you use the word hire. Because when you start using words like compensation, then normally you should have been a commercial applicator. In general, a private applicator, that's a licensed private applicator, he's licensed to use those products on his own farms, ranches, or places that he or she leases. When I get into the business of spraying for hire, then it brings in the need to have proof of financial responsibility, insurance. And so that's why, in general, private applicators only barter or exchange goods and services. They don't exchange money. That certified private applicator that came over to my place and he sprayed my place for me because I baled his hay, that had value, but it wasn't a true exchange of money. And so as long as we're exchanging, bartering services, we're good, licensed or certified. But if we start exchanging money, then that becomes proof of financial responsibility. And in Texas, it's termed commercial applicator.
Okay, we've checked the question line and I think everything else has been resolved. So I think we good, Tyler? Everything's good? Okay, we're going to go ahead and end this session and we'll begin the next one.
Before you end the session, would you thank Dr. Racy for shedding light to this vast audience? We appreciate it.
Gentlemen in the audience who joined us wanted to thank Dr. Renshie personally for shedding light to all of this information and sharing it with everybody abroad and helping everybody understand. And we second those statements from you, Mr. Knox. So we thank you. We thank you, Dr. Renshie, and we'll go ahead and get started rolling into the next session.
Like I said, I appreciate the opportunity to work for the citizens of the state of Texas and do their business on a daily basis. You guys are doing a great job over at Producers along with the board. And so we'd like to encourage everyone to abide by the rules so that we have an opportunity to have tools in our